Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about blood vessels. So blood vessels are the tubes that carry blood to and from the heart. Vessels that carry blood away from the heart include arteries and arterioles. The arterioles are tiny arteries. So the arterioles lead into capillaries. Capillaries are the smallest of the blood vessels, and they are the place where we are going to exchange materials between the blood and the tissues. A collection of capillaries is called a capillary bed. Capillary beds lead to venules, which are tiny veins, and the venules lead to veins, and then the veins lead back to the heart. So the general flow of blood is from a ventricle, blood will enter into an artery, then arteriole, then a capillary, then a venule, then a vein, and then back to the heart atria. Now let's take a look at blood vessel structure. Blood vessels are tubes, and all tubes have a space inside of them. The space inside the blood vessel is called the lumen. The blood is actually flowing through the lumen of a blood vessel. The layer of the blood vessel wall that's in contact with the blood, so the layer of the blood vessel wall facing the lumen, is called the endothelium. And this is a very smooth and slippery surface that makes sure that platelets don't stick to it unnecessarily. As we go deeper into the vessel wall, we're going to find a type of tissue called smooth muscle tissue. And the smooth muscle tissue in the wall of a blood vessel is very supportive, and it's under involuntary control. So unlike skeletal muscle, you can't consciously control the smooth muscle that's in the wall of the blood vessel. When we look at the tiniest of the blood vessels, the capillaries, we find that they lack this smooth muscle. They really are only made of the endothelium and then the lumen. So arteries are the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. Arteries are under very, very high pressure because the heart is constantly squirting high pressured blood inside of them. So they have lots of muscle in their wall to help keep them strong to withstand this high pressure. If the wall of an artery becomes weak, it can lead to an aneurysm. So an aneurysm is a ballooning out of an artery wall, and if that little weak balloon area happens to pop, then that can lead to something like a stroke. Some important arteries in the human body include the pulmonary arteries, which are delivering that carbon dioxide rich, oxygen deficient blood from the heart to the lungs. The aorta, so there's two major parts to the aorta. The thoracic aorta is the portion of the aorta that we find in the thoracic region, and then that leads to the abdominal aorta in the abdominal region. Brachial arteries are found in the brachial region, so the upper arm, and they're important because they're used to take a blood pressure. The femoral arteries are located in the femoral region or the thigh region, and these are significant because they can be used as an entrance site for an angioplasty, which is a procedure that's used to help relieve a clogged coronary artery that's causing a heart attack. You can also use a femoral artery as a pulse site location. Coronary arteries are really important because these are the arteries that are delivering the oxygen-rich blood to the heart muscle itself. When these become clogged, that can lead to a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. Other important arteries include the arteries that we use to take a pulse rate at. So we can take a pulse rate at many different artery locations, but the common sites include the carotid arteries, which are located in the cervical region, and these are the great arteries that are carrying blood up towards your brain. The radial arteries, which are located on the thumb side of the wrist, right? So that's a common site where we take a pulse rate. And then the dorsal pedal arteries, which are located sort of on the top of the foot close to the ankle, another common site for taking a pulse rate. So capillaries are the tiniest of our blood vessels. Arteries carry blood to arterioles, and the arterioles are delivering blood to the capillaries. And capillaries are important because these are the locations where we're going to exchange materials such as oxygen and glucose and water between the blood and the fluid that we find around our cells, which is called interstitial fluid. There are little gates that surround arterioles that lead into a capillary bed. And these little gates can be controlled. And when they're closed, the blood does not flow very well through the capillary bed, but when they're open, blood flows quite easily through the capillary bed. And these gates are actually called precapillary sphincters, and they're made of smooth muscle. And certain conditions will cause these precapillary sphincters to open. Heat, low oxygen, a decrease in pH, and high carbon dioxide levels are all things that can cause precapillary sphincters to open. All of those things are conditions that can occur when you're starting to do physical activity. So things like exercise will produce heat, low oxygen because you're using up the oxygen to make ATP for your muscle contractions. There'll be a decrease in pH because of the high carbon dioxide level, and the high carbon dioxide level is caused by you making lots of ATP, which requires oxygen and and produces carbon dioxide. So let's take a closer look at the process of capillary exchange. We're going to break it down to two parts. We're going to take a look at stuff leaving the capillary and then stuff coming back into the capillary. So at the arterial end of the capillary, and this is the end of the capillary closest to the arterial, there's a very high hydrostatic pressure. What this means is that there's a very high blood pressure here. Blood pressure is just the pressure that the blood is exerting on the walls of a blood vessel. And there's a very high hydrostatic pressure on the arterial end of a capillary caused by the heart. So what happens here is basically using this high pressure, we're going to squeeze blood plasma physically out of the blood right through the endothelium that is the capillary. So there are small spaces between the cells that make up the endothelium of the capillary, and some of this blood plasma is squeezed out through those spaces. But sometimes there's just holes that go right through the cells that make up the endothelium of the capillary, and the blood plasma can leave through those holes too. And so basically the blood plasma is leaving the capillary on this arterial side, and the plasma is entering into the interstitial fluid. Some things will just diffuse out, like oxygen that's in the blood will diffuse out of the blood towards the cells because the cells have been making ATP and been using up their oxygen, so they're more oxygen deficient than the blood is, so oxygen will just diffuse from an area of high concentration in the blood to an area of low concentration towards the cells. Now let's take a look at what happens at the other end of the capillary, at the venule end of the capillary. So once we get to the venule end of the capillary, what's happened is we've squeezed out a lot of our blood plasma, except for the proteins. Most of the blood plasma proteins remain inside the capillary. So the blood plasma proteins like albumin were not being squeezed out into the interstitial fluid. They were too big to fit through most of those holes. So when the blood arrives at the venule end of the capillary, there's quite a bit of protein in there. There's a higher protein concentration than the blood that entered into the capillary originally. And this high protein concentration acts as an osmotic draw. So osmosis is going to occur. What that means is that water in the interstitial fluid will be attracted towards the albumin, and the water will leave the interstitial fluid and then cross the capillary wall and enter into the blood. And this is just osmosis, where water is going from an area of low solute concentration in the interstitial fluid towards an area of high solute concentration inside the blood capillary. Something else that's happening in the venule end of the capillary is movement of carbon dioxide. Now don't forget the process of ATP requires oxygen and produces carbon dioxide. So these tissue cells have been very busy making ATP, and they've been producing a lot of carbon dioxide. So there's a high level of carbon dioxide in the cells, but a lower level of carbon dioxide in the blood. So the carbon dioxide will diffuse from an area of high concentration, the cells of the body, to an area of low concentration inside the venule end of the capillary. So now this carbon dioxide rich blood can be carried back to the heart, and we're going to use veins for that. Now, blood is carried at a much lower pressure inside the veins as compared to the corresponding arteries, and that's because we lost a lot of that pressure at the capillary beds. So we need something else to help return the blood to the heart, and we're going to use skeletal muscle contractions and our breathing movements to help return blood to the heart. So when our skeletal muscles contract, our skeletal muscles are squeezing on our veins, and this helps to propel the blood back towards the heart. Also, when we breathe, we have pressure changes that occur in the thorax and abdomen, which helps to pull the blood back towards the heart. Veins in our arms and legs have valves to prevent backflow of blood, so that when the skeletal muscles are squeezing, the blood doesn't actually go away from the heart. The one-way valves help to ensure that the blood only flows towards the heart. Weakened valves can cause varicose veins. Some important veins that we're going to find in the human body include the superior and inferior vena cava. Something you might not have known is that the inferior vena cava reaches all the way down the abdomen, almost near where your belly button would be. The pulmonary veins are the veins that are returning oxygen-rich blood from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart. We have jugular veins. We have internal and external jugular veins, and both of these are draining used blood from the head. And then we have the median cubital veins, which are located on the anterior elbow. And the median cubital veins are a common location used to draw blood from.